There was always something peculiar about my roommate Nairb. Granted, we knew each other most of our lives. It wasn't until we moved in together that I realized something about him was amiss. We always had a lot of mutual interests, from hobbies, movies, video games, and recreational activities, to aspirations, food and alcohol preferences. We even looked alike. After we got our place together, a 3-bedroom single-family home, we contemplated on what to do with the 3rd bedroom, which Nairb eventually convinced me to let him convert into his personal art studio. We both aspired to become artists, but when I asked if we could start sharing the studio, Nairb quickly said no, citing his extreme self-consciousness and need for privacy with his projects. "When the time is right, I'll show you everything I'm working on," Nairb would say whenever I brought it up. Although our work schedules prevented us from being in the house at the same time too often, Nairb often seemed to be cooped up inside his studio, sometimes for days on end. I figured he was even sleeping in there, since his bedroom consisted of a chair and some boxes stacked against the wall. More so out of concern than frustration, I brought up the seemingly unorthodox amount of time Nairb spent inside his studio to him, which he finally agreed to show me some of his sundry of work. I'll admit I was a little envious over everything Nairb had accomplished, which, for me, was enough to justify why he holed himself up in there for extensive periods of time. There were over a dozen paintings displayed on the walls and 2 canvas stands shrouded under white sheets. The L-shaped desk in the room was covered with papers, sketchbooks, and a laptop, while the bookshelf was filled with a swath of art supplies. Nairb's paintings were as mesmerizing as they were grotesque. Some were simpler, depicting animals, portraits, shapes, and symbols, while other more elaborate ones featured abstract designs, monstrous or mythical beings, and even unsettling illustrations of bodily scars, open wounds, and butchered limbs. When I asked Nairb where he got his inspiration from, he went to his desk where he showed me detailed sketches and photos of something that took me by surprise: tattoos. I've always admired the craftsmanship that goes into making one, but they lack certain components that keeps their depictions from being perfected, which can only be achieved through painting and drawing. Nairb arrogantly explained to me as he flipped through one of his sketchbooks. It's sort of a niche in the art world that hasn't been previously delved into, nor gets the attention it deserves. I grew more envious over my roommate's progress, but became bewildered and suspicious when he revealed the source of his inspiration. I don't recall specifically discussing this with Nairb, but did hold the same belief about tattoo art. Part of me immediately resented Nairb for capitalizing on, or, as I initially thought, stealing, my idea. On the contrary, we both practically thought alike, so it shouldn't have come as much of a surprise that our unique approaches would overlap. Although I was a lazy, unmotivated procrastinator, which I ultimately blamed on my creative inaction, part of me couldn't accept this was nothing more than a highly improbable coincidence. In retrospect, Nairb always had a proactive mentality when it came to his aspirations and interests. I was the dreamer, he was the doer. He never really encouraged or approached me when acting on something we mutually yearned, which I don't really blame him for, given my overall lack of ambition. Not that I didn't make an effort to mobilize my creative passion, but nothing I said or did ever stuck. It depressed me often, sometimes to the point where I wouldn't even want to get out of bed, especially knowing I had my own incompetence to blame. "Where on earth did you even come across all these tattoos?" I asked while flipping through the sketchbook. Smirking, Nairb gestured with his head as we walked up to a white coffee table-sized container that I just realized was adjacent to the desk. I was hit with a burst of cold, dry air when Nairb opened the top, realizing it was a freezer. When I saw what Nairb was storing inside, my blood ran cold. The freezer contained strips of vacuum-sealed human skin that varied in shape and size. Some were sealed on their own, while plastic sheets held anywhere from 2 or 3 to over a dozen. Each strip of human skin contained some kind of tattoo. Nairb retrieved one sheet containing 4 or 5 vacuum-sealed strips of human skin that he gestured for me to hold, causing me to quickly back away out of sheer fright and revulsion. "They're non-objective donors," Nairb said in a disturbingly nonchalant tone. "How?" was the only word I shakily uttered as a knotty queasiness quickly formed in my stomach. Shutting the freezer, Nairb lightly chuckled. "Let's put it this way. Anyone I got these from had no use for them anymore." He swiftly faced me, the expression on his face turning sterner and more sinister. "And this always stays between us. Got it?" I slowly shook my head in agreement, after which Nairb escorted me out of the room. Nairb changed after that day. He grew more controlling and oppressive to the point where I was genuinely intimidated. He started being one step ahead of me, seeming to know every one of my actions or decisions. He could somehow read my mind. I thought about finding a way out of my lease, but didn't want to endure the potential ramifications. Plus, I'm sure Nairb would somehow uncover and sabotage my plan. Instead, I adapted by spending more time out of the house. Living with Nairb had become daunting, but I wasn't being pushed to my breaking point. At first. That changed when I met Cynthia. She worked as a barista at the coffee shop I frequented, where I started visiting after work and during my downtime more often. We never really spoke much until I started spending more time there and learned we had a lot in common. Eventually, I worked up the courage to ask Cynthia on a date, and she gratefully accepted, saying she's been waiting for me to ask her since we started talking. We exchanged numbers and discussed the details as she closed up shop, agreeing to meet tomorrow afternoon for drinks at a nearby gastropub. We were outside, and as she turned away to lock the front doors, it was the first time I noticed the intricate tattoo on her back. An almond-shaped eye with a deep blue iris and light orange pupil, from which 2 angel wings protruded that ran the length of her shoulders. The feathers were white and different shades of gray, but were crafted in such detail they could pass as real. "They're beautiful," I said in a hypnotic tone as she turned back to face me. "I beg your pardon?" Cynthia asked, a smile spreading across her bright red lips as her green eyes flickered. "Your tattoo," I said bashfully as I awkwardly pointed at her and made a vague circular motion with my finger. Turning to look over her shoulder, Cynthia flipped some strands of her light reddish-brown hair. Blushing lightly, she smiled coyly as she took a few steps forward and gave me a quick peck on the lips that took me by surprise. "There's a whole lot more below you can see," she whispered to me, winking as she started walking down the street. "Maybe I'll show you tomorrow, Brian." Totally tongue-tied, my jaw dropped slightly as I watched Cynthia walk to her car. I probably stood there for about 5 more minutes after Cynthia drove away while my brain registered everything that just happened. During those first few minutes, I was completely consumed with thoughts of Cynthia and our upcoming date, my euphoria extenuated by a sharp sense of giddiness that ran up and down my chest and stomach. "She's something," I mumbled before I finally got myself to start walking. There was something about Cynthia that elevated my feelings about her tenfold. She was as warm, personable, and interesting as she was mysterious, compassionate, and vivacious. I kept replaying this particular image of her that reinvigorated my enthusiasm and flair I developed for her. I imagined facing Cynthia's backside while she lay on her side, resting her head in her palm. The dress I imagined her wearing completely exposed her backside, and I kept zooming in on the tattoo across her back, which was when I realized that particular part about Cynthia was the source of my infatuation. As I pondered what specifically about Cynthia's tattoo prompted my wondrous adoration of her, the uplifting sensation quickly faded and was replaced with a sense of dismay and unease. Thinking about her tattoo quickly shifted my focus to Nairb and his collection. There was no way he could ever meet or even lay eyes on Cynthia. I could never bring her to the house as long as I lived with Nairb. There were only 3 months left on our lease. I figured if things got serious between me and Cynthia, I'd be able to avoid bringing her over to my place for that long until I found a new one. When I returned home that night, Nairb was in his art studio. I didn't bother him and tried making as little noise as possible so he wouldn't hear me. Since I didn't have to work the next day, I opened a bottle of wine and binged on my variety of streaming platforms late into the night. I wound up staying up much later than I wanted, 5 a.m. to be exact, before finally going to bed. I had a pretty strong buzz going, which was enough to repress my swirling concerns about Nairb and focus solely on Cynthia. I went to bed feeling eager and optimistic about tomorrow afternoon, stopping in front of the closed door to Nairb's art studio before entering my bedroom. Light from inside was spilling from under the door's crack, and I couldn't hear him moving around inside. Figuring he must have fallen asleep, I stepped inside my room and plopped on the bed, drifting off within minutes. Soon as I woke up, something didn't feel right. Grunting at the light aching in my head, I slowly turned over to face my nightstand. My eyes widened and I sprung to life upon seeing my radio clock screen was completely blank. I saw it wasn't even plugged in and scrambled to find my phone, which was charging on my desk. I turned on my screen and saw the time read 2:38 p.m. My gut twisted. I was supposed to meet Cynthia 40 minutes ago. I saw she even texted me and swiftly unlocked my phone to view her message. Her text was 2 words. I'm here. But what made me pause was the time it was sent. 1:29 p.m. Arching an eyebrow, I tapped on her message with my finger and realized an entire conversation had occurred. Shuddering at the possibility of texting her when I was drunk last night, I was able to recall everything I did from the moment I got home, which put me more at ease. The first text was sent around noon, which was even more perplexing. Me at 12:08 p.m. Can't wait to see you today. Doesn't make sense to wait, does it? Cynthia at 12:18. LOL. What do you mean? Me at 12:18. What do you think I mean? Cynthia at 12:23. IDK. You trying to meet up soonish? Me at 12:24. How about nowish? Cynthia, 12:38 p.m. LOL, I'm down. Me at 12:39. Come to my house, short walk away. I finished some paintings I want you to see. My heart sank. I wanted to find Nairb and strangle him until his neck snapped, but was anchored to the floor and continued reading. Me at 12:39. It's a quick walk from the shop. 800 Taylor Lane, light blue house. Cynthia at 12:42. I didn't know you were a painter. Me at 12:43. Artist. Cynthia at 12:44. LOL, of course. Me at 12:45. So, should I expect to see you soon? Cynthia at 12:50. Should I bring anything? Me at 12:51. Just yourself. Text me when you're outside and I'll let you in. Cynthia at 12:54. Okay, leaving in 15-20 minutes. Cynthia at 1:12. Leaving now? Be there soonish. LOL. Cynthia at 1:29. I'm here. I wasn't sure what to think as I set my phone back down and stormed out of the bedroom. Did Nairb actually swoop in and steal my date? Were they locked up inside a studio, looking at Nairb's paintings? The bouts of jealousy quickly turned to genuine fear and worry when I reminded myself what Nairb had in that room. His skin collection, people's tattoos. While trying not to fathom what Nairb was capable of accomplishing over the last hour, I was also trying to determine how Nairb unlocked my phone. Did he find a way to get my password? Hack it remotely? My thoughts froze when I stopped at the doorway to Nairb's studio, which was now open. I stepped inside and didn't hear any voices or movement. Although the art studio was empty, I raced toward the freezer, threw the lid open, and started frantically sifting through the sheets and flaps of vacuum-sealed skin, sighing in relief when I didn't see Cynthia's tattoo. After seeing Nairb's room was also empty, I returned to my bedroom and immediately called Cynthia. After the first ring, I heard the sounds of a ringtone coming from downstairs, which sent a sharp chill down my spine. I stood motionless with my phone pressed against my ear until it went to voicemail. Breathing deeply, I slowly approached the banister and peered into the living room. I nervously called out to Cynthia as I started descending the stairs, desperate to hear her respond. Silence. A wave of dread swept over me when I spotted Cynthia's boots by the front door. Entering the kitchen, I saw Cynthia's coat thrown over a chair. Her cell phone lay on the table next to her purse, and light gray blouse, which had smeary dark red streaks and distinct tear marks. "No," I gasped, wildly scanning my surroundings as I wallowed in uncertainty on where I should check next. I was drawn to the downstairs bathroom, where the light was on inside and the door was slightly ajar. I screamed Cynthia's name as I threw the door open and almost fell to my knees upon being greeted to the grisly sight before me. Cynthia's limp body hung from the shower curtain rail. She was completely topless and her wrists were tightly bound to the metal pole. Her motionless, dangling head was entwined with saran wrap, and streaks of blood ran down her torso, legs, and the bathtub side. I raced toward Cynthia and tried freeing her wrists, which were tied to the pole with metal wiring. Her body collapsed on top of me as I cushioned her fall by catching and tightly wrapping my arms around her, where the flap of skin her tattoo covered, which was pasted on the bathtub wall, had been removed. Regardless, I let Cynthia's body down and started undoing the saran wrap around her face. I paused a few times to glance at the upside-down, cone-shaped strip of skin from Cynthia's back that portrayed her full tattoo. Cynthia was right when she said there was more to it than what I saw. The winged eye was perched atop a narrow, spike-shaped staff that appeared to have run down the length of her back. Weaving around the staff was a light green vine with black thorns, from which 4 or 5 blood-red roses blossomed. "Beautiful, isn't it?" I heard Nairb's voice say behind me. "She's long gone, by the way. Like I said, they come from non-objective donors. They have no use for them anymore." I stopped unwrapping Cynthia's head and slowly stood up after Nairb's remarks, my fists tightly clenched and heart racing. I struggled to contain my anger as I shot one more glance at the skin strip brandishing Cynthia's tattoo before slowly turning and peering into the bathroom mirror. "You don't get it, do you?" Nairb said condescendingly as I felt him looming behind me. "This particular one, it represents us. The eye and the staff are you, our foundation, our visionary. The vine and roses are your hindrances, keeping you from thriving. And I'm the wings, the means that lift you from your monotony, your conscious constraints." I felt Nairb encompass me with his encroaching presence as he whispered in my ear, "I'm freeing you." "From what?" I quickly asked in a staggered, breathy voice. "From yourself, Brian," he said belittlingly. "You always had that creative drive within you, just didn't know how to impel it. You became so disconnected from your aspirational identity as a result, but channeled it through me to keep it alive, to nourish and savor it. Now look what I brought you, Brian. The means to craft your greatest masterpiece yet." My resentment and fear towards Nairb were replaced with a sense of calmness and clarity as I started making sense of what he was saying. Nairb's revelation invigorated me as I stared at him in the mirror, both of us wearing the same exact sly smirk when everything he said started making sense. I did become the doer I yearned to be, and had been for much longer than I realized, with Nairb being the one to open my eyes. And the collection's greatest addition yet, I added to Nairb's comments as I stared into my reflection's eyes of the body we shared. Time to start painting.